Hi, my name is Dixie Mercer, and I'm an outreach teacher for Texas School for the Blind and Visually Impaired. Today we're going to be talking about how to modify and adapt materials for visually impaired students in your classroom. We travel the state of Texas here in the outreach program, and I see a lot of visually impaired kids every year, and I guess probably the question that I'm asked more than any other has to do with how to adapt materials for visually impaired students, how to teach people who can't see very well the kinds of skills that we teach our sighted kids in school. It's a real challenge because about 90% of everything we do in school is based on sight. It's based on visual kind of concepts, and it's also based on visual material. So it's a real challenge to try to modify some of these things. I'd like to talk to you for just a few minutes today and give you a kind of basic foundation and introduction in how you modify materials for the visually impaired student. Really, I have three sets of materials here I'd like for you to take a look at, and I'd like to talk about just a little bit. The very first set of materials is a set of materials that we've actually modified. We've actually done some tactile modifications to them, or we've done something different to make them more appropriate for a blind or visually impaired student. The second set of materials are these materials in front of me here. These are basically the things that you can use to modify various visual materials for those students. And then the last thing that I have is I have a couple of books that I'd like to talk about just a minute that'll give you some more information and perhaps some more ideas about how you can go about modifying things. Before we begin all that, though, I'd like to tell you just a little bit about some basic foundational concepts on how you modify materials for visually impaired students. I think that there are sort of some rules, some laws that you might want to keep in mind as you think about modifying materials for your visually impaired students. I think the very first one of those, and the most important one, is that you want to be sure and adapt materials as much as you can that are going to be used in the mainstream with regular ed kids. After all, the whole idea behind mainstreaming a visually impaired student is for that student to have an experience that's just as similar as possible to the experience that his sighted peers have in a regular classroom. So be sure that you take the things that are actually being used in the mainstream and you adapt those for the visually impaired students. The second thing is not to forget to make the materials that you develop for the visually impaired student just as visually appealing as you can. Now what that means is that you want to make things pretty. Even if your student is totally blind and can't see the bright colors or can't see the contrast in the colors, you still want to make those materials as visually interesting as you possibly can. The reason for that is because that student will be using those materials in a sighted classroom. And we want to have materials that are interesting and motivational not just for that student, but we hope that the sighted students around our blind student or our visually impaired student will be interested in using those materials too. It's sort of a hook. It's kind of an effort to try to get the students interested in participating with the visually impaired person by having attractive materials to work with. The third thing is that whenever I begin to construct materials that are adapted for visually impaired students, I always try to begin with the sighted version first. In other words, if I adapt a game or if I adapt a learning center, or a folder game, I begin with the sighted version. I build that version just exactly like the sighted kids and the rest of the room use. And then I think to myself, what can I do to make this more interesting, either tactually for my student? How can I change the textures? How can I give some movement perhaps? Or how can I reorganize just a little bit to make it a little bit more meaningful to a visually impaired student? The fourth law that I have, and I think it's a very important one, is that you never over-modify material. Sometimes it's easy to sort of get into the thought pattern of trying to modify for blind students or visually impaired students. And we just modify and modify and modify, really more than the kids need. Sometimes we make the lettering bigger than a low-vision student, for example, might need, or sometimes we put too much tactual detail on a game board or a folder game, so that it becomes confusing for the visually impaired student. We want to modify enough to make things meaningful, but we never want to over-modify. Partly because we don't want to make kids feel different, and partly because we don't want to encourage these students to begin to rely on modifications that are more than they really need. One of the things that we're trying to do, after all, is raise visually impaired students and educate visually impaired students so that they can be their own advocates and their own resource managers. And that means that they need to know how much modification they really need. So never over-modify. The fifth thing is to try to keep illustrations just as simple as we possibly can. You don't have to put a lot of detail if you're doing tactual maps, for example, or if you're doing a tactual adaptation to a game board. You don't have to put a lot of detail, and you don't have to make each little individual curve and each little wrinkle look exactly like it does to a sighted person, because after all, the transfer isn't 100%. You can't feel something on a board and get a totally accurate visual image of what that looks like. So more than anything else, we really want to use those illustrations as markers or as simple diagrams. Another suggestion that I have for modifying materials is to try it yourself. I think it's important that we be able to close our eyes or put a blindfold on or put on, if we happen to have simulation goggles available, and take a look at the material that we've done or feel the various adaptations that we've made. See if it makes sense to us. And remember that we still have visual images about what we've done. So it's going to make even more sense to us, blindfolded, than it will to a visually impaired student who's never seen the material and who doesn't have that visual map to guide him or her. So try it yourself. See if it makes sense. See if you can make the tactual distinctions, or see if it seems well organized to you. The seventh thing is to design games for independence and independent peer play particularly. By that I mean it's really important, in my estimation, that kids have materials that they can do by themselves. We want to make our visually impaired students just as independent as possible. And one of the things that they really need to do that's sometimes very difficult is to try to learn how to function by themselves or with peers in a group, without a teacher, without an adult, without supervision. After all, school ends eventually, and then those students are going to be adults on their own, and they won't have teachers and they won't have adults constantly supervising them. So we want to begin to nurture that independence from a very early age, and in very motivational situations, like for example in gaming or in the use of learning centers. One of the problems that you will find as you begin to adapt materials for the visually impaired is that it's difficult sometimes for you to write down the instructions, or to use a timer, to use some of the things that we use that are really traditionally done visually with print. A couple of options are available. One is that you can use Braille. The problem that you're going to find with totally blind students is, first, that some of them aren't very good Braille readers, and second, that the Braille instructions themselves are so long and cumbersome just because of the medium. My suggestion is that when it comes to directions and timers, when it comes to anything that we do in print on a board, one of the options that you have is to use just a standard cassette audio tape, so that the student can plug that tape into a tape player, listen to the instructions, play the game, use the tape as a timer for anything that might be needed in terms of the game of the learning center. So use tape. I think tape is a real good option for these particular students. Another thing that I think is important to keep in mind is to use as many simulation games as possible. And by simulation, what I mean is taking games that sighted children play, and that visually impaired children hear a lot about on a daily basis, and trying to convert those into some kind of tactual form that the student will understand. Games like baseball and football and soccer, things that sighted kids take for granted because they see those games being played and they participate in them all the time. Visually impaired students very often only get the language that's associated with those sports, and so they never have a real tactual map, or they never have a tactual model of how those games are played. So when you modify materials and you make games for visually impaired students and for them to play with their sighted peers, it's very often helpful if you can use one of those games that are so popular with sighted folks, so that our visually impaired students get a better tactual idea about how the game plays, how the game works. Don't forget to use functional items whenever you can. That's particularly true if you happen to work with students who are visually impaired, as well as have other impairments, multi-impaired kids particularly. It's important that our kids encounter as many functional items in a hands-on kind of way as they possibly can. That includes things like kitchen utensils and eating tools and grooming items, combs, brushes, wash rags, soap, anything that you can, any kind of functional item that you can work into a game, if it's a matching game or if it's the same or different kind of categorization game. You can use those functional items and give our kids an opportunity to have good experiences with those items in a different kind of setting. Finally, I think it's important that we bear in mind that our kids need an opportunity to compete fairly. Students know, and visually impaired students know, when they're allowed to win or when the game is rigged in their favor, or if it's not fair, if there's no opportunity for them to win. So if you design games that are specifically to be used with sighted peers, then maybe you want to build in an option where the sighted student is blindfolded, or maybe you want to build in an option so that part of the game has to be done strictly tactually or strictly auditorily. Those games are a little bit more complex and they're a little bit more difficult to develop. But I think it's important for our kids that they have a fair, honest opportunity to compete, because after all, competition is very important in this society. So those are some just fundamental rules, some basic ideas about how to adapt materials for visually impaired students. Let's talk just a little bit about some materials that I've already adapted, and I'll show you some quick examples. And after we've done that, I'd like to talk a little bit about the materials that can be used for adaptation. And finally, I'd like to show you a couple of resources. I guess we can begin with this road rally game right here. What I did here is I took just a regular sheet of poster board, and I used highly contrasting colors, the blue and orange, so that the game can be used not only by a totally blind student, but also by a low vision student. Also, I've made it appealing in terms of color to just regular sighted kids. The race car down at the bottom is a high contrast kind of color. And notice that it was actually constructed with sighted kids in mind first. It has printing on it. The directions are available in print up here. Then I modified it. And with this particular game, the only modifications that I had to do was first I did the same race car out of sticky felt, and I did the wheels out of sticky velour. So there are two contrasting textures here. And the other thing that I did is I put in some braille labels here that say the same thing that this says up here. And then I used a tactual cue about where the road is. Now let me show you how this game works. One of the neat things about being able to adapt materials for visually impaired students is that you can use three-dimensional objects like real toys or real models as part of the game. So with Road Rally, for example, the way this game is played is you use a regular little race car, a toy race car, and you casually feel along here and make the race car go the way that you feel the road goes. Now the idea here is that you start at the top and work your way down, and the student has to use two hands to keep the race car on the road, just exactly like a student would have to do in order to read Braille efficiently. So it's built for the sighted student, it's built to be visually appealing, it uses a three-dimensional object, and it's been modified slightly for the blind student just by adding some tactual detail. So that's Road Rally. Let's take a look at this. This is a little bit simpler example of a modification. What I've done here is taken a preschool activity, really. It's a tracking maze kind of activity. I got this pattern out of a regular pattern book for kindergarten kids, just like you might be able to find in a good Apple store or in any kind of educational supply house, or like you might be able to find at your education service center. I made a transparency of that pattern and then projected that transparency onto this piece of poster board, drew my pattern off, and then colored it in, fixed it exactly like I would for a sighted student. And then I said to myself, okay, so how can I modify this for VH kids? And the answer is, well, I needed to put some tactual cues on here so that the vision student would be able to use his or her fingers to find the maze and to find the beginning and the end. So just by way of trying to do an example of a different kind of tactual material, I decided that I'd use yarn, and I just simply used rubber cement, glued that down, and then put the yarn on top of it to leave these tactual paths. I used, again, some braille labels here that said exactly the same thing that the print says. And then I used some markers. And if you notice, these markers are not any particular pattern or shape. I wasn't particularly careful about making this an arrow or making it a triangle. And a tactual marker up here that's the same shape roughly as the door. And notice that it's not a perfect match. It doesn't have to be. It needs to be fairly pleasant visually, but it doesn't have to be totally accurate in terms of the tactual detail. So that's one alternative that you can use. It's fairly inexpensive. It doesn't require a lot of specialized materials. Okay. This is another preschool kind of activity, and it illustrates a couple of things that I think are really important. One thing is, you can't tell by looking, but this is a tactually raised spoonshine that's from an Ellison die kit. And all of your service centers, or at least all the ones that I've been to lately, have had Ellison punch-out dies available. So you can use a heavier weight of cardboard in those. You can use this material right here, which is a sticky felt material. You can use cardboard, and I'll show you a lot of other kinds of materials here in just a second that you can use in those Ellison letterpresses. It's a simple way to do any kind of shape that you want to. It takes a lot less time, and it's a lot more sharp and a lot better detail. The other thing that this particular piece of material shows is this game has some options for it. It has some things that kids can take off and put back on using Velcro fasteners, so that this part is tactile, and it gives the kids an opportunity to manipulate some things. And then it has crepe tape down here for the crack in Humpty Dumpty's wall. Now, crepe tape, and I'll show you what that is in just a second, can be used for any kind of border activity that you might need, any kind of trailing activity. It can be used to divide up the squares, for example, on a gaming board. Again, I've added braille where I needed to. Just taking shapes and cut them out of different paper for the clouds and for the grass down at the bottom. So a real easy kind of game to modify, real easy activity for kids to do and to appreciate tactually. Let's take a look at some of the materials that are available to do modification. Let's talk just a little bit about materials that are available for adapting various educational games and centers and so forth for visually impaired kids. There was a time, not very long ago, about 5 or 10 years ago, when it was pretty tough to find materials that could be used tactually for adapting games and so forth. But now there are a lot of new things that are coming out that are really, really helpful for teachers of the visually impaired. One of the best things that's happened in a long time for us is Velcro. These are Velcro strips, and they can be bought at any sewing notion store. The nice thing about them is they come in strips that are varying lengths. They can be cut with scissors, any length that you need in order to attach things, and then kids can take things off and put them back on again. They have an adhesive back on them so they can just be peeled off and placed down on whatever surface you want. These are excellent for things like the squares on a game board, holding the markers in place. Visually impaired kids have a hard time because they tend to knock those markers around when they look for them with their hands. So just a little tiny strip of this Velcro can be placed on each square, and then a little bit of the top part of the Velcro can be put on the token piece, and it'll hold that token piece down where it belongs. It can be used, as it was in the game with Humpty Dumpty, for actually taking things off and putting things on game boards. It's a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful piece of technology for us. If you don't, or you don't want to use Velcro for some reason, or you can't use Velcro for some particular reason in the construction of the game, then the second best option, as far as I know, is Handy Pack. And Handy Pack is a gummy substance. It's a little bit like clay, but it's much stickier, and it'll hold things on, and then it can be peeled off. It can be remolded. Handy Pack is a little bit tougher than Velcro and a little bit easier to to use in some situations where you're going to put things down for quite a while and leave them in the same spot, and then they need to take them off for sighted kids. So Handytack is a good option also. Another thing that's really, really helpful is sticky flannel and sticky velour, and I've got examples of both of those. These are adhesive-backed contact kinds of materials, so that the brown paper on the back peels off, and they can be used on any game board, on any surface. They stick down very nicely. These can also be put into an Ellison letterpress, and various shapes can be punched out and then applied to the board. Most service centers carry these as part of their materials production center, and they can be punched out or cut out with scissors. So this is a real boon to VH teachers. The other thing that's available is a sticky Velcro, and you can see that I've already cut some shapes out of this particular piece. This is a little bit finer surface. I think of it as a little bit warmer surface. It also has an adhesive back on it with paper that's just pulled off and can be pasted down sort of like a sticker. This material is available generally in smaller sheets, and I guess the biggest sheets I've seen are probably about 6 inches square. But these are more available from places like office supply centers or Michaels or Crafts, etc. These are two nice contrasting textures, so that students can tell the difference between the two textures very easily, and they make nice contrast also visually. So sticky velour and sticky felt are two really nice objects to have in your little modification bag. Just recently there's a whole new product that's come out. It's called Sticky Wiki. And this stuff is a real neat kind of tool for visually impaired students. I'll show you what it kind of looks like. It comes in strips, as you can see, that look sort of like pipe cleaners. But the nice thing about Sticky Wiki is that it can be used over and over again. It can be formed into any shape that you want it to be formed into. It sticks down, and then it can just be peeled off and reformed and reshaped in any kind of shape you want. It can be used for everything from orientation and mobility lessons to games, markers, to any other kind of border that you may need around illustrations or graphics. It's wonderful. It comes in 4 colors. It's red, blue, yellow, and green. And it comes in packets that look like this. I've also seen it in like balls or sort of on spools. So check with your local craft store and see if they have Sticky Wiki. If they don't, give me a call, because I have an address where you can order it directly. In terms of other specialized kinds of materials, I guess the thing that I use more than anything else is geotape. And this is called, it comes in a lot of different forms. This particular brand is geotape. I've also seen it called crepe tape. There's something called formalin tape. It comes in a wide variety of widths and surfaces and colors. You can even get it in patterns like polka dots and stripes. The nice thing about geotape or crepe tape is that it has a surface on it, and it's just a regular sticky tape, so that it can be taped down on any surface and form a tactual barrier, form something that students can track along. And then it can be cut with an X-Acto knife in corners. It can make some really nice distinctions on a gaming board or a learning center. I would recommend that you buy, if you find formalin or geotape, generally you find it in office supply stores. Sometimes Michaels or Craft, etc., places like that will have it also. I recommend that you buy several colors and several widths, because again, remember, you're going to try to make these things just as visually pleasant as you can for the sighted people in the classroom. We use just plain old yarn in one of the games that I showed you before. You can use materials that aren't very specialized at all, that are just available around the house sometimes, and those are the very best materials you can have. Yarn can be used as a tracking border. Samples of different fabrics, I've seen people use fuzzy fabrics regular cotton fabrics, denim, chambray. I've seen these all kinds of different fabrics, and sometimes mix them together on the same game board so that shapes are cut out of just fabric pieces, and those form tactual characters on the board. One of the problems that we always have with visually impaired kids is how to organize things. A wide variety of pockets and envelopes and things like that are available. I would encourage you to remember to use just plain old library pockets. You can get them from your librarian. Very often you can flip Braille cards or large print cards, game pieces down into these pockets, and then these pockets can be glued under the back of the game board, and kids can keep up with their materials a little bit better. I brought a roll of Dynamo tape just to sort of remind me that I should tell you about the option of a Dynamo Braille labeler. You know about the kind of clicking marker that we have Dynamo labeling with. Well, there's one of those available in Braille, and most of your service centers will have those, so you'll need to contact your educational specialist for the visually impaired at the service center, and they should be able to loan you a Dynamo labeler for Braille students. Now, that's a really nice kind of thing to have, too. Let's see, you can also use things like, I have just a regular 6-egg carton here, for example. We've used this for everything from a practice Braille cell for pre-Braille students down to a way to organize materials and store materials for older VH students. So anything that you have around the house that has compartments, medicine bottles, any kind of little boxes, those are often very handy to help the kids with organization. Because as you know, one of the most difficult things that we have to teach our children is how to keep themselves organized and how to keep their materials available to them because they are well organized. I want to show you another set of materials that are available for doing tactual modifications on game boards and centers. These materials are all available from the Ellison Company, which is the same company that produces the letter presses that we were talking about earlier. There's a price list that's available with an address for ordering from the Ellison Company. Usually your service center will have this material, again, in the materials production section. If you need the address or the phone number, give me a call and I can provide that information to you also. But these materials all come from the Ellison Letter Company. This is just a chunk of sponge, and it's compressed and it's dehydrated, and you can put that under a letter press and punch out any shape or any letter that you want to. Then you put it into water and it swells up and makes a wonderful three-dimensional shape. So it can be used in a wide variety of modifications. They can be used as standalone shapes for matching, for same and different practice. They can be used even for things like making grooming practice more enjoyable. So it's a really neat kind of thing. The service center generally will have this available. This is also available from the Ellison Letter Press Company. This is a sheet of magnetic material, and I'm going to slap it up here on the phone case so you just get an idea about how it sticks. It's a magnetic material that has a vinyl coat on the front of it. It also can be placed into the Ellison Letter Press, and it can be cut in any shape that the Ellison dies are available in. Then the shapes that have been cut out can be stuck on the side of a filing cabinet. They can be stuck on a metal board. They can be rearranged. I think it'd be a great kind of material for making, for example, a checker set or a chess set for kids who are visually impaired. If you use a metallic background and then use crepe tape to mark the squares off, this would stay on the board, and that's the real problem with visually impaired kids. It gives good fine motor practice in pulling it off board and in manipulating the pieces. So again, it's a really nice little piece of material. These are a couple of my favorite textures. These are also available from the Ellison Company. They have really several things about them that are awfully nice. One of the things that you can't see is that they feel really good. They're really soft. I tend to think about textures in terms of warm textures and cold textures, and these are very warm textures. They're very pleasant, actually. So if you have kids who are tactually defensive and don't like to touch things, these feel a lot like human skin, sort of. They're real natural feeling and real pliable and real warm. The other nice thing about them is that they're very, very motivational for sighted students as well, partly because of the bright colors, but also because they have the ability to do this. They're like a magic slate that you can write on. Even the impressions of your hands will stay. Now these can also be put into an Ellison die cut machine and chopped out for forms or letters. They're very appealing and very motivational. Low vision kids would find these, I think, really, really appealing. They're nice, contrasting, bright colors, so that if a student has partial sight, he or she could see them very nicely and use these particularly for cues and game board. This looks like just a plain piece of plastic. It's clear. It doesn't look particularly special in any way. The trick about this particular piece of plastic, though, is that it can be used in a die-cut machine and then heated. And as it's heated, it shrinks. So it's shrink plastic. If it's colored on with markers before the shrinking takes place, then the color becomes really, really intense and really very visible. So for low vision students, this would be a particularly interesting way to illustrate things. Also, if you want to use just tactual illustrations for totally blind students, you can cut these out in a larger size and shrink them down to a size that's more practical for game boards or centerpieces. Finally, our last piece of material from the Ellison Company is a piece of kind of static cling vinyl. It has, again, a really nice warm texture. It's available in bright colors. It's good fine motor practice, picking things out and putting them down. And then the other nice part about this is that it sticks to almost anything. It'll stick to any surface, to a desk, to a filing cabinet, to anything that might be around. So again, you can punch shapes out of it and then use those shapes in any way that you want to. If you wanted, for example, to have a center where children were required to match shapes on a board, you might use geotape or crepe tape and make those shapes and then cut the inside shapes out of these so that they were matched and placed within the formal line of the geotape borders. So it just has a lot of uses. Anything that you want to illustrate, any kind of tactual design or graphic that you want to do is really well done with this kind of material. Okay, one other thing that I'd like to show you is a special system. This is called a stereocopy system. And to you, it probably looks like just a bunch of shapes that are black and white. But if you were here and if you could feel these, you'd realize that there's a ridge where these black lines are. There's a ridge that's tactually identifiable. Now, the nice part about a stereocopier is it allows you to take any black and white design, put it through a regular copy machine with special paper, and then put it into a stereocopy machine, and whatever's black will swell up and become a tactually raised line. That means that you can do maps, you can do diagrams, you can do valentines that are tactual, you can do matching games that are tactual. You could take this, for example, and match it with shapes cut from the sticky or the static cling vinyl, and you've got the game right there. So these are really easy to use. They have a lot of really good uses. The only thing that you have to really be guarding against in terms of using the stereocopier is that you don't want just a whole lot of detail, because it gets kind of busy and it makes less sense tactually. Service Center VH components generally have these. So if you're interested in doing some stereocopying, you might want to contact your Service Center, your VH consultant, and ask him or her about these. Bear in mind that the paper that this thing uses is extremely expensive. They're going to charge you probably about $1 or so a copy to make these. So that's a stereocopier. Alright, finally, I'd like to show you a couple of books that are available that may give you some more games, may give you a little bit more information. These are fairly standard books in the field. Most service centers have a copy of these. They're available for checkout. They're also available from a wide variety of catalogs, and I'll tell you what the publication sources are. This is Simon Says It's Not the Only Game. It's a fairly old book, I guess, in terms of the field itself. It's been around for a while, but it's still a really good resource in terms of just ideas about games that visually impaired students can play. It's got games that are designed especially for VH students, and it's got ideas for modifications as well. This one was compiled by Bernadette Leary and is available from the American Foundation for the Blind. And if you need that address, you can give me a call, and I'll be happy to share it with you. So Simon Says is not the only game. The other book is a little bit newer. It was developed by Patricia Gallagher, and it's called Educational Games for Visually Impaired and Sighted Children. It's very similar in that it has board games, it has ideas for adapting materials and resources. It was published by the Love Publishing Company in Denver, Colorado, and is, as far as I know, still available from that source. So if you're interested in information about either one of these two books, if you'll call me, I'll be happy to give you any information that I can. It's been a pleasure to share with you this morning. I hope you enjoy modifying materials for visually impaired students, because I know they'll enjoy using them. If you need any help, be sure to give me a holler. My name is Dixie Mercer, and I'm at Texas School for the Blind and Visually Impaired. My phone number is 512-454-8631. Keep doing good things for VH Kids. Thanks.